Soybean seed treatments. These things, Darren, have grown in popularity just tremendously in the last 10 years. I mean, I can think about planting soybeans on our farm back in the 80s and 90s. We were never using seed treatments.
Well, the only exception that we really made to that was inoculant. We were using inoculant, and for me, when I would hear soybean seed treatments, oh, you mean you're putting inoculant on? And we'd talk to some different chemical companies. They'd say, well, wait a minute. No, we've got some fungicides you could be using. So at the most, it was a fungicide and some inoculant. That was it. Nowadays, there are a lot of choices with soybean seed treatments, and when we think about the yield impacts that they could potentially have, it could be quite a bit.
Well, here's what's changed. It's not just the yield impact is better. In other words, we've got better inoculants, better fungicides, better insecticides, better biological products. They're all dramatically better than they were 10, 15, and especially 20 years ago. But besides that, we've got good commodity markets, and we have very good yields in a lot of cases. On our farm in the last several years, we've averaged close to 60 bushel soybeans. Well, I'm shooting for 70 now. I'm going to hopefully pretty soon be shooting for 80. And it makes a lot more difference when you're going for the higher yields as opposed to the lower yields, because you're going to gain more total bushels if you're gaining the same percentage.
Well, and that's really how it comes down to. I look at soybean seed treatments, or really any additional practice you do on your farm, as really helping on a percentage basis. Because a lot of times guys will ask me, well, what am I going to gain? 2 bushels, 5 bushels? And I say, well, what's your yield level? If you're yielding 100 bushel soybeans, you're probably going to gain 5 or 10. But if you're yielding 40 bushel beans, well, then maybe you're going to gain 2 or 3 on some of these things. So it's all relative. If your yield level is double, the amount of gain that you could potentially get could be double.
Well, that's true, Darren, but here's the way I look at this thing. With products like fungicide, for example, some years we gain 5 bushels, some years we gain nothing. And that's just the way it goes, because when I plant that seed, I don't know if a disease is going to show up or not. So I want to protect my seed no matter what. Because the other big thing that's changed now versus 10 years ago is now we're spending $50, $60, $70 an acre on soybean seed. And well, let's go back to right before Roundup beans came out, we were spending maybe $8 an acre. So I really want to protect that seed. I don't want to take risk like I used to. I've got to get every seed to grow. We're not planting as many seeds as we used to because we're protecting a lot of those seeds with fungicide.
Well, here again, we're back to one of those practices that you have to spend the money up front and put all the protection out there.
Invest it.
Okay, you have to invest the money out front, and then just, you know, you hope there isn't any problem. You hope there isn't a disease. You hope there aren't bugs that come along, but we all know there probably will be. And so you don't know if putting a fungicide on the seed is going to be the biggest thing that you do this year, or putting an insecticide on, or maybe some of the biological products that you use. You don't know which one is going to pay you back. What I can tell you is that over the years, and over a period of years, and over the variety of all the fields that you have, you're going to see an average gain from using these practices.
Well, I better stop you right there. We don't know if you're going to see an average gain. It's very likely that you are, but what we want you to do is test these things out and look at it over a period of years. That's how we ended up doing all these things on our own farm, because they all paid off over a period of time. And certainly some years they're not going to pay, but most years they do.
But also over a number of different fields, because if you just try something on one field in 1 year on one variety, who knows? It might work out great, and it might not work out at all. Maybe you get a 20 bushel gain, and you say, wow, I'm going to do that everywhere. Hold on, hold your horses a little bit. You're not going to get a 20 bushel gain all over the place on a seed treatment every single year. Not if you're at a 40 to 60 bushel soybean level.
Okay, let's real quickly talk about the products you can throw on. Let's start with that fungicide thing, since we mentioned it already. You know, for many years, people have talked about Apron Max. There's Innovate that a lot of farmers have been using that's got a fungicide in it. The newest one out is the new Acceleron that also has Xemium in it, and we're pretty excited about that.
Well, it's just getting more modes of action out there. When you think about the fungicides, yes, you're right. Like when we think about metalaxyl, how long that's been out there, and it's been a great product on Pythium, but we just haven't had any other choices. And so we've got this one family of chemistry that's been used just over and over and over again. Now we're finally getting multiple modes of action in there for these fungicides, because let's face it, we've seen resistance happen with herbicides, with BT traits, with about everything we do on the farm. Nature's going to find its way around our treatments. So we've got to use multiple fungicides out there to try and avoid that or put it off as long as possible.
The reason why we're not going into great specifics on each one of these different products is simply this. If you use one package or the other, it's not nearly as big a deal as if you use one versus not using one. So the untreated acre, that's where you're going to have problems. And I don't care which of the fungicide packages you're going to use, you're going to see some gain most likely.
All right, well, that's enough about fungicides. Let's talk about the insecticides, Brian, because there's a lot of diversity here. We're talking about multiple modes of action, lots of different products.
Darren is kidding, obviously, because there's only the neonicotinoids. That's Poncho, Gaucho, Cruiser. They're great products, don't get me wrong. It's just it's only one mode of action. And I love them because they're systemic. They have activity on bean leaf beetles, even a little bit on soybean aphids, and a whole number of other bugs. And they're relatively safe to humans. But again, it's just one insecticide family. All right, let's move on.
All right, let's talk about the biologicals a little bit because there's a little bit of diversity here. Now, we talked just for a minute about inoculant, meaning rhizobia bacteria that help nodulate on the roots and bring nitrogen from the air into soybean plants. This is something that happens in legume plants. It's fantastic because you can get about 70% of your nitrogen needs for free. Well, for a couple of bucks an acre on inoculant if you want to make sure you have good nodulation. So that's a very important thing because when you look at soybean seed, it's a very high protein crop. Soybean seed has a lot of protein in it, and so we've got to bring nitrogen in to make those proteins.
Hey, when we're talking about this inoculant, just 2 quick points I wanted to make. Number one, the inoculants today are way better than what we used to have even 10 years ago. So we encourage you to inoculate on every single acre. I don't care if you're planting beans on beans even. What they found in studies is you'll leave more nitrogen for the next crop even if you don't gain yield this year. The other thing with these inoculants is they don't cost very much money. So how much can you really expect out of them? What I'm trying to say is Darren says, well, 70% of your nitrogen you can get, you're not going to get it just by inoculating. What I'm trying to say here is, let's say you're bringing some ground out of CRP, hasn't had a legume crop for years or a soybean crop for years. Just inoculating probably isn't going to do it. I'd double inoculate. I'd use a liquid and a dry. And besides that, I'd probably put a little bit of nitrogen on, maybe 25 to 50 pounds, something like that. You've got to really accelerate it if you haven't been using beans at all in the rotation in the past.
Well, here's one of the big objections we have from many farmers across the country. I can't use the inoculant because I've already put on a fungicide, insecticide package, and now my seed's going to get too sticky if I add something else to it. Look, it can get a little bit sticky, there's no doubt about it. What we do on our farm, we'll put that fungicide and insecticide on first, then we'll use a dry inoculant right in the planter box. You can do it that way.
Yeah, not always. If we're treating the day of, then we'll put all the things together and spray it all on liquid.
But the other thing you can do is if you're having somebody treat that seed for you, they can use a drying agent with it. So as they're putting that treatment on, it's not so wet and so sticky. The other thing that you can do if you're using other biologicals, like for example, we use a lot of quickrits on our farm. Well, we just use our rhizobia bacteria inoculant as the liquid portion to mix that quickrits up. Now you only have 2 liquids in the tank, the fungicide insecticide combo and then the rhizobia bacteria and quickrits combo to avoid the clumping issue.
Yep, so if you haven't been using a seed treatment on your farm, you probably think we're nuts when we tell you, well, we want you to use an insecticide, a fungicide, an inoculant, and then another biological product. I know it seems like a lot.
So we do.
Yep, but we do that. There are a lot of farmers out there doing that because we're gaining yield. And especially with the price of soybeans today, boy, it does not take much. You gain 1.5 bushels. You paid for all that stuff. And a lot of times we're gaining 5 bushels or more when we're doing that combination.
Well, there's a lot to talk about with soybean seed treatments, but there also is with our Weed of the Week. We'll explain later in the show.